Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining. We'll start the webinar in a few
Hello,
seconds.
good morning.
Good morning, everyone.
Joo, mä alkaa nyt.
Wow. I have to disconnect a few seconds and connect back. I had a bug. If I may, just a minute.
Okay, it's 10 o'clock now, so it's the time to start. Welcome to the second edition of the European Lighting Forum. For those who were not with us the last time, the European Lighting Forum is a new platform which aims at bringing together the experts from the lighting value chain and experts from the built environment. In this gathering, we share ideas, we share experiences about common challenges and opportunities that we see. Today's session is dedicated to the key topic of indoor environmental quality, which means looking at buildings beyond energy savings to also consider the well-being of the occupants. Let's have a quick look at the agenda. So today we welcome two speakers, Neil McLean from Lutron and Dominique Figdert from Systemair. We'll have the two sessions, two presentations in a row, and we'll have a Q&A session that follows that session. If you have any question, feel free to drop it in the Q&A even when Neil is speaking, but just please be aware that we will pick it up once the two presentations will be over. Once this is done, we'll have some closing remarks also at the end from Elena Scaroni, our Secretary General. Before we dig into the topic, a few housekeeping rules. So of course, no competitive information can be shared during this webinar. All your webcams and microphones will be turned off, just to make it easier to listen to the speaker and to focus on the presentations. As I mentioned, you can put your questions in the Q&A box. Please make sure that you put your name and surname clearly, because we will prioritize questions from the people that we can identify. The webinar is recorded. You will get access to this recording after the meeting. The link and the slides will be sent to you after the meeting, and you will also receive a link to share your feedback. So now, digging into the topic and the presentations that we have today, as a first speaker, we welcome Neil McLean. So Neil McLean is responsible for industry relations in Europe and Asia for Lutron Electronics, where he supports regulatory developments relevant to lighting controls and automatic solar shading systems. Prior to this role, he had a number of senior UK and international roles in the lighting industry, including with Philips Lighting, Sylvania, or Ricolite. And he is a very active member in a number of associations, including Lighting Europe, where he's a very active member of our working group Value of Lighting, which is a group dealing with indoor environmental quality. So Neil, over to you for your presentation.
Thank you, Marianne. Let me just share my screen. Hopefully you're seeing the right thing.
We do.
Right, good, okay, thank you. Right, so yeah, as Marianne said, I'm Neil McLean. I'm responsible for industry affairs for Lutron Electronics in Europe and Asia. And if you don't already know Lutron, we're a leading manufacturer of lighting control systems as well as other products, and we're based in the United States. The topics that I'm going to run through today are on the screen. So we're going to go through what is indoor environmental quality, why is it important? We're going to go through some key aspects of the lighting aspect of it. Why are we spending time discussing it in Lighting Europe? And then we'll try to relate some of the value that it brings to multiple different stakeholders. So indoor environmental quality, or IEQ for short, is an indicator of the quality of conditions inside a building. It encompasses factors such as indoor air quality, often known as IAQ. Dominique's going to speak about that a little later. Thermal comfort, lighting, and noise. The top bullet on the screen here shows the definition of IEQ that was recently added to the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, or EPBD for short. which is the EU's framework directive that all the EU member states use as the basis to develop their national building energy regulations from. So the EPBD describes IEQ as the result of an assessment inside a building based upon parameters such as relating to the temperature, humidity, ventilation rate, and presence of contaminants influencing the health and well-being of its occupants. Sadly, you might have noticed that this basically describes aspects of indoor air quality. The other aspects of total IEQ are absent from the description. And this is a real problem because the other aspects, including lighting, are critical in providing a complete and holistic approach to good IEQ. And in fact, lighting is one of the main components in IEQ. So why is lighting so important when considering IEQ in total? Well, to begin with, the World Health Organization tells us that today, we in the West typically spend around 90% of our time indoors. In evolutionary terms, this is a very unnatural situation. Up until a few hundred years ago, humans spent most of our time outdoors under natural, or so-called natural environmental conditions. Then along came gas light and electric light, which meant that we didn't need to rely on daylight coming into buildings to help us see anymore, and allowed us to create buildings that were very deep and with very small window area relative to the floor area. And as a result, many people have become effectively starved of natural daylight. Even today, this is not an unusual situation, with many people at desks and offices or at machines and factories located somewhere in a building where there is little daylight or maybe even none whatsoever. Good lighting has the potential to greatly improve the way we enjoy and feel in a space. In fact, there's little that can change how pleasant or unpleasant a space feels quite as easily as light can. In addition to those psychological effects, however, light also greatly influences physiological effects. Mammals function on an approximately 24-hour biological clock, and even in continuous dark, following what are referred to as circadian rhythms, circa meaning around in Latin and dies meaning the day. There are several external cues that humans use to synchronize our biological clock with the Earth's natural day-night solar cycle. Those cues are called Zeitgebers, from the German words time and donors. These Zeitgebers include things like temperature and sound, but it seems that the strongest cue that our bodies use to figure out what time of day it is light. Humans are diurnal, day active, and so our circadian clock promotes wakefulness during the day and sleep at night. For humans, our body temperature, oh, sorry, I've gone forward a slide here. For humans, our body temperature is higher during the day, peaking in late afternoon and falling back again during the night. Our alertness, mood, and performance vary throughout the day too. When we wake, we initially experience what's called sleep inertia as the brain gradually wakes up. Our alertness then stays quite high and quite steady until the middle of the evening, when the brain again begins to promote sleep. Towards the end of the evening, we begin to produce the hormone melatonin. Melatonin tells the brain in humans that it's night and that we need to sleep. Nocturnal animals like mice and rats also produce melatonin at night, but in their case, the signal tells their brains that it's time to be active. So the complete opposite of what it does with us. There are also rhythms in the function of essential body functions, including the heart, lungs, liver, immune system, and other key body processes that are tuned to our body clocks. So not surprisingly, disruption to the body's circadian rhythm is associated with chronic conditions, including obesity, diabetes, and depression. The right light at the right time is very important. So what are the key lighting criteria that contribute to lighting IEQ? Well, I'm going to speak about three key aspects: quantity, quality, and personal control. The first aspect, quantity. And by quantity, in this case, we're speaking mainly about the quantity of light that's required to perform the visual task. This is highly personal. We all require and prefer different amounts of light, even to carry out the same visual tasks. And different visual tasks need different amounts of light. You can imagine that more intricate and detailed tasks like reading printed text in small font are generally more visually demanding, visually challenging for our eyes, excuse me, than, for example, a simple task like walking along a corridor, and therefore they need more light. Another hugely important factor dictating the amount of light an individual needs is how well our eyes perform. For most of us, our eyes quickly drop off in their acuity as we get older, but they may not have been the same or performing particularly well from the start. We see children wearing glasses is very common. We also have personal preferences. Some of us simply prefer brighter spaces to make our space feel comfortable, whilst others prefer dimmer spaces to make them feel comfortable. Second key aspect of lighting relating to its contribution to IEQ is light quality. Quality light illuminates the experience by creating beautiful, comfortable, and productive environments, free from disturbing flicker and with high color rendition abilities that accurately show the objects in the space. Quality light uses light sources that provide consistent and reliable light output and that have no color shift over time. The third and final aspect I'm going to speak about today relates to personalized control. Adaptive and personalized control can be described as intelligent solutions that adapt and provide personal control of intensity, color temperature, and the distribution of the light in the space. Harnessing lighting solutions with intuitive personal control gives occupants the power to change their space wherever and whenever they need to. And like we said earlier, we all have different preferences and different needs. Complementing personal control is automation, which creates an environment that intelligently adapts throughout the day as smart systems and sensors behind the scenes react to environmental conditions and respond accordingly. So we've spoken lots already about the value that IEQ brings to the occupants in a space, but what value does it offer to other stakeholders in the lighting chain? Well, as we said, for users and employees, excuse me, IEQ helps them enjoy the space and have improved satisfaction at work and better well-being. For employers, they can benefit from improved employee recruitment and retention. Building owners and investors can benefit from the fact that if their buildings become more valuable to tenants, it becomes possible to command higher rental fees. And electrical installers and lighting designers can differentiate themselves with a greater expertise in this crucial and developing topic. IEQ is also becoming a legal obligation. For example, the need to consider IEQ, as we said earlier, has now been built into the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, the EPBD. So will appear in member state national law, and employers already have a legal duty of care to look after their employees, including for their safety, etc. There are a few things going on right now that have made the IEQ topic one that Lighting Europe and its members are spending more time with. The first point is that one of the few good things that came out of the pandemic was that there has been an increase in the public awareness of the importance of spaces that promote good well-being and that are pleasant and attractive to work in. IEQ is crucial in supporting that. A second point is that the drive for carbon emission reduction can conflict with the drive to improve IEQ for occupants. It's not unusual that to provide better IEQ, there can be an energy cost associated with that. And the most extreme versions of energy efficient spaces are not necessarily spaces that are best for the occupants inside. And the last point is that regulators are referencing IEQ. We just mentioned this, such as with the EPBD. This is a great thing, but needs some attention in the member state implementation to support recognition of the important role that light plays. And Lighting Europe is working on that now. And finally, that's the end of my presentation, but some closing remarks from me are that it's crucial that IEQ isn't treated as simply being the same as IEQ or indoor air quality. To do that is missing a great opportunity to make a difference in the spaces that we create and work and live and play in. Help us spread the word. Good IEQ should be considered to be a must-have, not to be simply a nice-to-have. And support the EU member states to include lighting as an explicit part in their total EPBD requirements that they'll be developing over the coming months and years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Neil. I think this was a very, very good start to our event today. I would now like to take the opportunity to introduce our second speaker for the day, which is Dominic Flickwerth, who is a Senior Group Public Affairs Manager and the Head of Public Affairs for Europe, the Middle East and Africa at Systemair. He is very experienced in public affairs, especially concerning energy markets and energy and sustainable policies for products. He has only been with Systemair for a relatively short amount of time, but he is very well versed in the Brussels arena. He worked for among others, for Lighting Europe as well, for 6 years, as well as a Brussels-based public affairs consultancy until April 2024. And with this introduction out of the way, Dominic, please take the floor.
Thank you very much. You make me sound like somebody very important and knowledgeable, but it's so thank you for the honorable and for the very nice introduction. So I'm impressed by. And it's for me also a pleasure to speak here with you, and especially to see so many familiar names and familiar faces online. So it feels a little bit like coming home to Lighting Europe. So thank you very much for having me here. And the main focus of my presentation today will be on indoor air quality. And for that, I will first tell you what the EPBD does for IEQ shortly, then why indoor air quality requirements are included in the EPBD, and what our concerns are with the implementation of it. And with all 3 points of those, there should also be some alignments and points that can be shared with lighting as well, especially with the third one, because that's where we will have to move forward and in many cases also work together. First, I will tell you something about Systemair, so about the company that I am representing today. The company celebrates this year its 50th anniversary. We are a mid-sized company, and we are active with production in 17 countries. We mostly produce ventilation, but also heating, air conditioner, or heat pumps. Our mission is to create better air. It's to have air that's comfortable, leads to our well-being, that's also healthy. And that is also our main mission, to be the partner that provides the most efficient heating, ventilation, or air conditioning products to optimize indoor air quality. Which then also leads to the following point, which is how the EPBD is fostering indoor environmental quality, since it is actually a tool that has been developed to foster energy efficiency, and rightly so, because the European building stock is responsible for 40% of the EU's energy use, and also is directly linked to 1/3 of our greenhouse gas emissions. Since 2/3 of the buildings in Europe have a poor energy performance, it is no wonder that it is mostly focusing on energy efficiency and sustainability. But because of that, it is also the perfect tool to include indoor environmental quality requirements, especially since it is regulating where we spend 90% of our time in. And the uniqueness of the revised Energy Performance of Buildings Directive of the new EPBD is that for the first time it sets mandatory IEQ requirements. So during the previous review, we were all ecstatic that IEQ was mentioned for the first time in general at all without any mandatory requirements. But now those voluntary points have been transferred into mandatory requirements for member states to ensure adequate IEQ standards, including also that the EPDs have to include recommendations for an optimal indoor environmental quality. Unless they have energy class A, then it's not needed anymore. So it's still linked to energy performance of a building. Whereas at the same time, we will also have obligatory points for smartness of technical building systems, mostly in building automation and control systems, and also with the smart readiness indicator. So why is that? And why do we have such requirements for indoor environmental quality, and then especially from the perspective of air in the EPBD? And that is because the air that we are breathing in actually isn't that great. So in general, with each breath, we inhale about half a liter of air, which is 17,000 liters of air per day. And what we're breathing in is dust, molds, cement, pollen, various kind of chemicals, but also bacteria and viruses. And we also noticed that during COVID, that the air that we're breathing in is so important. And the air that we're breathing in from the outside is heavily affected by human activity. So now here you see a very nice skyline during COVID, clear blue skies. Then human activities restart. And you see that industrial activities and transport activities, and they lead to a pretty bad air quality. And then smog kicks in. And then you see that what we're breathing in is as much that we might as well throw in a cup of espresso dust into our lungs and then gargle that up, which doesn't sound really nice. Point is that we are not noticing that because it's spread over a whole day with every single breath that we're taking in. And this is getting worse. So the comfort or the idea that we are just getting clean air and ventilating by opening up the windows is false, because the air from the outside is often worse than what we're having inside. And this has severe consequences. Within Europe alone, we can avoid up to 150,000 premature deaths that can be linked to bad air quality. At the same time, bad indoor quality leads to sickness. It leads to people being absent from work or from their studies. It leads to people being less productive. So there is a productivity loss as well, which leads to up to 260 billion euros loss in GDP in the EU. At the same time, there is also the misconception that having good indoor air quality costs more energy, which is not the case, because due to the improvement of air quality, you will also need to use much less energy to cool or heat the room you are in, which can lead up to 26% of savings in your energy bill. So the opportunities and the potential in improving indoor air quality are actually enormous. So the remedy is actually to make sure that the air that we are having is properly ventilated, and that means that it's not standing still, it's moved, it's mixed, it's also filtered, and that it also removes all the contaminants or the particles that have such a negative effect on air quality and on our comfort, well-being, and on our health in general. And this in the end should lead also to healthy buildings that are pleasant, safe, but also very energy efficient, with the support of ventilation and filtration. And this may sound a little bit cliche, but as long as Elon Musk hasn't yet found a way to colonize Mars, we only have one planet where we live in, with an increasing urbanization and with an increasing population. We might as well make it a place where we can live pleasantly and healthily. And one of the ways that we can do that is to make the places where we spend most of our time in healthy environments. And a good and clean air is one of those elements that are necessary for that. This sounds all great and nice, that the EPBD is fostering the indoor environmental quality, and that there is finally some obligatory requirements for it being set up. But we do have a few concerns. And as you can see in the title, is that our concern is mostly with how member states will actually implement it. So since it's a directive, it is not directly applicable, and member states have until mid-2026 to transpose it into their legislation, which means that there can be quite some deviations between how they do that. And our concern is that they actually won't. So the requirements in the text are actually rather vague. And historically, we have seen that the way how member states deal with that is not always positive. And even the definition mentions that there should be an assessment of conditions, but which assessment, what type of conditions, how should they influence the health of well-being, what parameters will be followed, and that makes it very unclear and gives member states a lot of leeway on how to deal with it. Considering that the list is non-exhaustive, you can actually see that also as something positive for some sectors, especially for lighting, because that means that you can also lobby for having lighting requirements included. Nonetheless, as we mentioned earlier, it's the first time that IEQ standards are being set. And the question is then also, okay, what are the adequate IEQ standards? What is considered healthy? What would be the recommendations in the environmental product declarations? And the point that I couldn't mention on the slides, but since it's rather sensitive, and I understood that in the lighting sector, it isn't such a problem, but in HVACR, so for ventilation and air and heating, it very much is a problem, that there are sometimes national champions for which member states come up with requirements that are mainly intended to protect their own sector. So with certain types of EPDs or with certain types of requirements, it sometimes becomes clear that some member states are deviating from the rest of the EU, and that it is mainly fitting for some of the companies that are present or headquartered in within their own borders. And that is something that you want to avoid, because it may help on the short term some local companies, but it may have enormous adverse impacts on Europe as a whole, especially if we are competing on a global level, but we are not able to create and get our act together as a single market. So the IEQ is not only an opportunity in terms of comfort, well-being and health, but also in terms of increased productivity and market level playing field and fostering economic growth in Europe. And that's not an opportunity that Europe can miss at the moment. So we are very concerned about the market fragmentation that could occur in case of too large deviations in applications by member states. Another point is also that the focus is mostly on non-residential buildings, and that is not always where we spend most of our time in, and it may also be a missed opportunity. So we hope that for the next reiteration and review of the EPBD, it will also be extended to residential buildings. But here there is another rather controversial point, that due to the strong impact and importance of bugs, there is a tendency that some sectors will try to take the lead or ownership over indoor environmental quality and start imposing one-size-fits-all requirements that aren't optimized for the specific subsectors, such as lighting or ventilation or heating, but that it's mostly controlled from the control side. And that is also a concern that we should avoid, aside from the uncertainties that the smartness and the smart requirements that we may have in the future will bring. So we would very much support the adoption of Commission guidelines that are clear and set out also IEQ recommendations that are unambiguous and will also be followed by member states. At the same time, this also means that we need to lobby the member states individually to ensure that they do not go too much off path compared to the rest of the EU. This also requires an alignment between industries, and we should also avoid a proliferation of manifestos, especially if those manifestos will start speaking from different perspectives and have different contents or different recommendations, because then the value of each of those manifestos gets severely reduced. Fortunately, at European level, the associations, they speak kind of with one voice, and we do have a common IEQ manifesto, which then is detailed out in further sector-specific recommendations or manifestos, but that's okay. At least the general lines between the main industry associations is aligned. And with that, we should also try to gather the support from academia and from installers to speak with one voice, so that we also can foster the awareness raising through events, trainings, targeted at investors, suppliers, end users, which then also will increase the chances and the messaging that we are having throughout Europe, and that then over the coming years will be adopted in a way that somehow or rather kind of aligned and doesn't lead to too much market fragmentation. Yeah, thank you very much. I hope this was clear enough, and I am looking forward to discussing with you.
Thank you very much, Dominic. I think that was very, very insightful for all of us. And I would now like to kick things off in the Q&A section. As a quick reminder, you are all more than invited to use the small Q&A icon up there to access the Q&A section and to start posting your questions. In the meantime, we have already received a few questions, and I think the first one goes to you, Neil. The question raises the point that people may or may not be so starved of daylight in the future when you consider climate change and recurring heat waves. Daylight is, in these cases, unfortunately, more associated with heat, and buildings need to be efficiently shaded with very efficient solar protection, and this may impact lighting. So could you maybe tell us in a few words something about the interplay between temperature and daylight?
So I think the point is makes sense. There are, so for sure, solar heat gain is a big problem and a growing problem in buildings. We see lots of tall glass buildings going up. Strangely, even in those buildings, these can be still very deep buildings, and people close to the center in those buildings can still be surprisingly lacking in daylight. But I think what we see in terms of managing the solar heat gain in the building, what I understand is the trick is to try to reduce the heat gain into the building at the time that the light is or the sun is pointing directly at it. Not only does this reduce the at that face using solar shading, which can either be automated solar shading or it can be through part of the design of the building. And you want to not only avoid the light penetrating deep into the space, the sunlight penetrating deep into space because of the solar heat gain that it brings, but also because of the glare that it brings. So generally, if you can avoid getting the sun shining straight into the building, and that's probably a good thing in terms of reducing solar heat gain and the glare that you'd get from the sun. But daylight is more than just the direct sunlight, and the daylight has a much lower effect on solar heat gain in the space. So the light that you get from the sky, the diffuse light that you get from the sky, is a big contributor to the light in a space. I don't know if that helps answer the question, but
I think that was a very, very good question. Maybe Dominic, as someone from the HVACR industry, do you have anything to add, maybe from your perspective there as well? How does this interplay also with your industry?
You mean the interplay between temperature and light?
In general, also if there's an interplay also from your angle.
Yes, of course. So with proper ventilation, you can also maintain air quality and temperature levels at a more stable level. So if you have a system that includes a heat and cooling recovery, then through that, the fresh air that comes in and the old air that gets extracted, they pass through a system where the temperatures are getting exchanged, which means that your cooling or heating needs will be severely reduced. And that's also where you have a strong potential in energy savings and in the use of energy reduction. And I hope that that answers the question a bit as well. Yeah.
No, it does. Thank you very much. Maybe another question to you, Neil. So when it comes to the implementation of the Energy Performance of Buildings Directive, what would be your top recommendations for the member states?
That they go beyond the definition that's in EPBD at the moment, which is certainly the examples, as Dominic pointed out, it's a little bit vague in that it says it uses the term such as, but then the such as examples that it gives today are really examples from indoor air quality. Like I said, other aspects, including lighting, are really important in creating good indoor environmental quality totally. And we need the member state implementation to recognise that, so to not only take the examples that are related to indoor air quality and to expand that.
Excellent. And then maybe also a question for the both of you, since we are currently still, let's call it, recovering from the European elections. So in the light of the changes of the political landscape in Europe, how do you see this impacting the overall topic of IEQ? Maybe let's start with you, Dominic.
That depends on the actual outcome of who comes into the Commission and what the majority coalitions will be in the Parliament as well. The changes will be relatively minor, and we also think that the main focus will shift from sustainability and energy towards competitiveness and industrialization of, or reindustrialization of Europe. And I do not think that they are that health and well-being or comfort is exclusively in one of those elements, so that we need to explain the importance of IEQ for the new priorities of the European Commission as well. And that in that sense, we may move forward or even optimize the potential that we can have on a European plane. But at the moment, the main implementation of the main legislative act, which is the EPBD, is done on a European level. And the focus of that is now moved towards the member states and how they are implementing it. And there you may see some discrepancies and some differences in how it's being approached, mainly due to political belief, some countries wanting to stick to the old and not wanting to address or to move forward with more stringent requirements, also related to the costs, because many member states, they have an electorate that's very fearful of having a higher cost for renovation or new construction imposed of them, or some member states just don't have the money for the public buildings, since most of the requirements currently in the PBD are targeted at non-residential. So there is a very high risk that the IEQ requirements that will actually be implemented will be on a very minimal level. And that's something that we may want to avoid, because that may lead to a discrepancy between member states, where some member states say, this is important and we have the money for it. And some others, no, our electorate cannot afford it. And honestly, our budget also doesn't. So that's where we will have to find a middle way, I think.
I think you. It was a very, very good answer, Dominic. Thank you very much. That's why we are so grateful to have you here with us. And maybe another reason why you are such a wonderful speaker, and addition to this lighting forum, is that you yourself have quite the history with the lighting sector. So you know all about the challenges, especially when it comes to promoting IEQ, also human-centric lighting, better lighting. Now with your also your experiences when it comes to air quality, do you think that that the air quality industry is doing a better job when it comes to sending the message of promoting good air? And if so, do you have anything that you may want to share with us? Any of your learnings there?
I think it's a little bit double, because the main reason why indoor air quality is having a strong position in the EPBD or other legislation is because it started off much earlier as well. There were situations in the 70s, 80s, and 90s where there was strong public awareness on the impact of air, and people were dying because of carbon dioxide poisoning in buildings, or due to the very bad air with smog outside that we were then breathing in inside, unfiltered. And that led to awareness and also political action, and also willingness from population, from investors, to actually acquire better quality ventilation systems. And lighting started with that awareness building a little bit later, which means that it will also take a little bit longer before the lighting requirements for indoor environmental quality will be on par and on the same level as with ventilation, air, or heating. And there is actually one point that lighting is doing better, because in lighting you have a much more unified message on what human-centric lighting is and on how to move it forward. There is much less of national interests that are trying to protect specific companies within the borders of the industry, which in HVAC you have much more. So it's a little bit two-sided. On the one hand, yes, air quality started much earlier, and also due to people having died because of it and the society wanting to avoid it. But on the other hand, the lighting industry is doing a better job in keeping a unified voice and one message.
No, I think that nails it very much. Maybe to turn things around, Neil, do you think that maybe in addition, do you have anything else that you think that the HVAC industry may learn also from lighting?
I don't know. I really don't know what the I don't know.
No, no problem. I think with the messaging, I think Dominic already touched on a few points. For another question for you, Dominic, the example of the shot of espresso when it comes to the inhaling the particulates, was that from a European city, and what might be the equivalent shock statistic look like in lighting?
No, so that's just an average, global average. And in Europe, you have places where it's much worse. For example, in places like southern Poland or in Hungary than in areas where we have cleaner air, such as Sweden or Finland. But even there, indoor air quality with the CO2 or with radon or with dust, there is also a need for improving indoor air quality, but they're already further ahead in tackling it. So there is a composition of averages that I can maybe find here between urban and non-urban, but then I need to unhide these slides. Where are they? If you give me 1 second, then I will find
No
them.
worries.
Yes. Because they're not in my slide deck, but I do know where they are. I'm almost there.
Okay, then let's give you 1 second to find
Yes.
them, and then we can
Yes.
move on with the Q&A. I think we are very well on time, so we can take this second.
Yeah, so I found here something that may be of interest. So what we have is that due to urbanization, you see that the worst air quality is where you also have the most people living in clusters, and also where there is where you also can find a link between temperature rise and climate change. So that means that the most of the CO2 is actually emitted in the northern hemisphere, so such as the US, Europe, or China, and that's also where you have most of the industrial activities and the industrial emitted gases that are being sent out. They are continue hanging or are most difficult to be removed or filtered out where temperature is highest. And even though these slides, they don't give the averages, we do see that there are differences in the location where they're being set. So for example, in the urban area, you have a much different way of composition of air than in rural areas. We do believe that it will get worse due to an increasing urbanization, an increase of economic activities worldwide, and also a general growth of population, aside from the predicted rise in temperature. And when I look at the composition, yes, so there are, I'm going to show you another slide, which is on the many different ways in how air is being actually composed. So you do have the airs, the captures that are based from human activities and also from a biological nature. And aside from that, also elements that we have in nature or are being radiated through nature, but that human activities can either increase or lower. And that's especially the case for CO2, but also for radon, for example. Radon is an element that in Europe doesn't really have yet a lot of awareness, but in the US it actually does. And that's an element that's very much related to lung cancer. And that in older buildings, you see that the occupants of older buildings with low ventilation, the lung cancer ratio is much higher than in newer buildings with better ventilation, due to the fact that the radon is being filtered out, and radon is an element that is just being emitted by the paint, by the plastics, by the cement that we're having in buildings as well. And aside from that, it's like you mentioned earlier, it's very much affected also by the temperature and by human and economic activities that we're having. And that's also, yeah, here the slide is also on demand controlled ventilation that is being affected, but yeah.
Wow, this is all very, very impressive. Thank you so much, Dominic, for all these insights. But as today, these discussions are and tend to be held among professionals, among people with interest and knowledge and topic. I think also today in our audience, most people have at least a very healthy baseline understanding of the issues. But what about the average building user? What about the average building owner? There, maybe the level of knowledge when it comes to IEQ may not be as deep yet, unfortunately, and social media also not always the best source for these kind of informations. So what do you think about the importance of the right level of education of everyday users about these topics? Do you think that they can already receive it? Do they know where they can get it? Maybe Neil, let's start with you. What's your take on this?
100% agree. I think there is a great missed opportunity for people to understand better the implications of good IEQ. I'm not sure if it was in the presentation or before the presentation. Dominic was talking about the lack of, or the way people kind of brush aside some of these things, not understanding how influential they can be. So completely agree. There's a need for it. Lighting Europe attempts to contribute to sharing that knowledge. So for years has been preparing all sorts of documents and events and online information to share the importance of good lighting, and other organizations do the same, but there's certainly a need for much more of it. I'm not sure where it would appear. I think it's something that needs discussed, you know, where our time should be spent in promoting that. I think needs discussed. It's a good question. If we're working that, we're not working on something else. But maybe we need to give this a little bit more attention. So, good point.
Mm-hmm. Maybe Dominic, you have a few words to add.
Yeah, no, it's Neil is totally right, and that was also one of the points that I think lighting is doing better. So you have a dedicated website on the value of lighting that's also giving information to end users on how it's impacting people in different, how lighting has an impact on different age groups and different activities. And in air or in heating, we don't have that much. There's not really a unified voice. There is a lot of attention from academia, strong focus on helping installers understand what the impact is, and also on trying to use that combination and their support in lobbying countries or member states. But for the end user, there is still a very strong dependency on what the installer chooses and what the installer recommends to the end user or to the investor. And the way of how to reach the end user or the investor and have already give them a base level of understanding of the importance of indoor environmental quality is something that's very difficult and to reach. And I think that in heating and then ventilation may be more difficult, considering that not everybody has the same idea or the same concept of what is indoor air quality. And in that sense, that lighting is already doing a little bit better of a job in that sense.
Thank you very much. I think everyone likes to be complimented. Yes, maybe the last question that I have here in my Q&A box. It's a rather large one, so I'm just gonna read it out. It's directed at you, Neil. So on your argument that we live only for about 100 years to 90 with artificial light, the person asking the question likes high color quality and agrees that high light quality is very beneficial. However, first also see also that the human eye is very evolutionary and very much adapted to red orange light from fire, which is evolutionary and artificial light compared to the sun Thus, no animal living under the natural light has so good vision in red light compared to humans. So we are already quite adapted to non-sunlight. Do you agree? And how to deal with this argument in fighting for a higher light quality?
I think I think we're mixing up different topics here. So access to daylight is being lost, and the things that daylight brings are being lost. So anything that electric light can do to help address that is positive. I think the fire thing is true, but not really related to my message, which was about basically the circadian thing. I think I also would argue that the light is the firelight is a natural light. It's a full spectrum emitter like the sun is, and it's still quite a natural form of light. So I think that but it's different from the thing that we're talking about the fact that we evolved under daylight and everything that means. It changes its dynamic nature, it changes in intensity, it changes in color temperature. Those are very often things that, because we spend 90% of our time indoors, many of us don't experience the way we would have done. So any contribution that electric lighting can do to address that is really important.
Excellent. And I think with that, we are out of time and out of questions. So it just remains for me to say thanks very much to both the speakers and also to our audience asking so many brilliant questions. And then I would just like to give the floor now to our Secretary General for some closing remarks.
Thanks a lot, Simon. Thanks a lot, Dominic and Neil. It was really an exciting conversation. I learned a lot, definitely. And I think it's so funny that we are discussing indoor environmental quality in a day like today, where the sun is shining all over Europe. We should spend our life, our day outside, indeed. But it is what it is. The political agenda doesn't wait. The EPBD has to be implemented. Tick tock, tick tock. Really, the clock is ticking, and we have to really move on with the implementation of the EPBD. So some key, let's say, takeaway from today. For sure, organizations or speakers today share for sure that IQ is a fundamental parameter in buildings, is a must-have. Second key point, indeed, there is a general satisfaction that now EPBD includes IQ with mandatory requirement. This is a major progress, a major development indeed. And third point, of course, the actual implementation of the IQ is in the hands of the member states. So now there are opportunities and challenges, of course. So opportunities, we have a chance to have a better and a better definition of IQ, indeed, with a parameter properly mentioned, of course, such lighting. Challenges as well. Of course, member states may go in different direction and create a potentially fragmentation of the market with non-consistent requirements. So now, indeed, our call as Lighting Europe is, let's join our forces, let's meet, let's talk, let's discuss. We need a consistent implementation of the EPBD at national level. So we are kicking off the discussions with some first ideas you will see published on our website this week, next week, so past week and this week, our first thoughts on EPBD and in particular on IQ. But indeed, we need to get together and to get to joint guidance, joint messages on the implementation of the EPBD at member states level. So we look forward to hearing from you. Let's get in touch. Let's work together. And so a lot of success to all of you, to all of us, for a good implementation of the EPBD. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elena. I think with this that we arrived to the end of this webinar. So of course we want to thank again Neil, Dominique for joining us to speak on this very important topic, for everybody else to have joined this webinar as well, and for the very good questions indeed you shared with Simon earlier. So indeed you can stay tuned for more events in the future. We'll expect to have at least one of the sessions of these webinars by the end of the year. And if you are interested in, reading and hearing again about what we discussed today, you will receive an email from my colleague Ilana, who will share again the slides, the recording. It will be available on our website as well, and you will receive a survey about the webinar. If you would like to be invited in the future and you're not on our list yet, you can contact our colleague, Ilana, as well. So thank you so much again for joining. We exactly on time, close to 11 a.m. So thank you again, Dominique. Thank you again, Neil. This is not, I'm sure, the last time we discussed this very important topic, especially now that we are at the beginning of the EPBD implementation. So we'll be in touch very soon again on this topic. Have a very good day and a very good week.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.